She stood
finally
on the
over.
courthouse steps, divorce papers trembling in her hands,
Now I can
wearing a
start fresh.
$40 blazer from Target. Navy blue. Her ex-husband
shame it
always
had to
said
end
navy
this way,
blue made
Avery.
her look
Avery.
tired and old. She bought it anyway. It
Get
was
in the
the
car
first piece
now.
of clothing she had chosen for herself in 7 years. What you are about to hear is not a fairy tale. There is no prince on a white horse, no billionaire swooping
all
in to
on
save the
here.
day. This is the story
Please,
of a
Avery,
woman
you
who
have
was
to
told
believe
that
me
she was
too.
nothing, who believed it
We'll
for
protect
7
you.
years, and who had to claw
We
her way
stand here
back to
today,
herself
united,
one impossible day
because
at
the
a time.
time for silence
Her
is
ex-husband
over.
had money,
We will not be dismissed.
power,
We will be heard.
connections. He had already destroyed her career once, and he was about to try again. But he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated her. If you have ever felt invisible in your own life, if you have ever loved someone who slowly convinced you that you were crazy, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end. I promise it will be worth it. A cold wind swept across the steps of the Harris County Family Court as Avery Mitchell stood motionless, divorce papers trembling in her hand. She had imagined this day 1,000 different ways over the past 7 years. Sometimes she pictured herself crying. Sometimes she pictured herself running. But she never pictured herself standing here in a $40 Target blazer she had bought specifically for this moment, feeling absolutely nothing at all. The blazer was navy blue. Grant always said navy blue washed her out, made her look tired and old. She had bought it anyway. It was the first piece of clothing she had chosen for herself in 7 years without asking his opinion first. Such a small rebellion. Such a stupid thing to feel proud of. But Avery clutched that feeling tight against her chest like a shield because she knew what was coming. She had seen Grant's silver BMW in the parking lot. She had seen the passenger seat occupied. And she had made herself a promise before walking into that courtroom. No tears, not one single tear, where he could see. The courthouse doors opened behind her, and the sound of Grant's laughter rolled down the marble steps like thunder before a storm. Avery did not turn around. She kept her eyes fixed on the Houston skyline, on the glass towers catching the winter sun, on anything except the man she had given 7 years of her life to. But his voice found her anyway. "Well, well," Grant said loudly, clearly wanting the scattered lawyers and clerks on the steps to hear. "Look who is still standing here. Did you forget where you parked, Avery? Or are you just waiting for someone to tell you what to do next?" A woman giggled, high and sharp like breaking glass. Avery's fingers tightened on the divorce papers, crinkling the edges. She forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way that therapist had taught her 3 years ago, before Grant convinced her that therapy was a waste of money and time. She turned around slowly. Grant Mercer stood at the top of the courthouse steps, tall and golden and impossibly handsome in his $3,000 suit. He had the kind of face that made people trust him instantly, all warm brown eyes and easy smiles. Avery had trusted that face once. She had loved it desperately, completely, blindly. Now she saw it for what it was, a mask. And standing beside him, tucked under his arm like a trophy, was Tiffany, 26 years old, blonde highlights and designer sunglasses and legs that went on forever. For he had met her once at a company Christmas party, back when she still believed Grant when he said she was just an assistant. But there was something different about Tiffany today. Something Avery had not noticed from across the courtroom. Tiffany was pregnant, visibly pregnant, at least 5 months along, from the curve of her belly beneath that tight white dress. The realization hit Avery like a physical blow. Her vision tunneled, her breath caught. For one terrible moment, she thought she might actually collapse right there on the courthouse steps, giving Grant exactly the reaction he wanted. But then a car horn honked from the street below, sharp and impatient, and the spell broke. Avery exhaled slowly. "Congratulations," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I hope you have better luck with him than I did." Tiffany's smug smile faltered. Grant's eyes narrowed. Before either of them could respond, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Avery, get your behind down here. We have got ice cream melting in this car, and I am not about to let that man ruin my rocky road." Avery looked down to the street where a beat-up Honda Civic idled at the curb, hazard lights blinking. Leaning out the driver's window was Diana Santos, her best friend since their freshman year at the University of Houston. Diana was 35, Latina, a single mom who worked as a paralegal and took absolutely no nonsense from anyone. Right now, she was glaring up at Grant with the kind of contempt usually reserved for cockroaches and men who did not tip. Avery felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had not even realized was there. She walked down the courthouse steps without looking back. Behind her, she heard Grant scoff. "Good luck out there, Avery," he called after her. "Try not to fall apart like you always do." The words were designed to hurt. They were designed to remind her of every panic attack he had witnessed, every moment of weakness he had cataloged and filed away for future use. But Diana was already out of the car, holding the passenger door open like a chauffeur. "Do not you dare let him see you flinch," Diana said quietly as Avery approached. "That man fed off your tears for 7 years. Starve him." Avery slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled like vanilla air freshener and the chicken nuggets Diana's daughter had spilled last week. It smelled like safety. Diana closed the door and walked around to the driver's side with deliberate slowness, pausing to look up at Grant with a smile so sweet it could have curdled milk. "Nice suit," Diana called up to him. "Did you buy it with Avery's money, or did you wait until after the divorce to steal from your next victim?" Grant's face went red. Tiffany tugged on his arm nervously. Diana got in the car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb without another word. So, they drove in silence for 3 blocks before Avery finally spoke. "She is pregnant." Diana nodded. "I saw. He never wanted kids with me. He said I would be a terrible mother. He said I was too unstable, too emotional, too broken." Diana reached over and squeezed Avery's hand. "Remember what my therapist told me after my divorce? The best revenge is not success. It is indifference. When they cannot get a reaction from you, they lose their power." Avery stared out the window at the Houston streets sliding past, the familiar landmarks of her old life, the coffee shop where she and Grant had their first date, the restaurant where he proposed, the intersection where she had sat in her car for 3 hours last year, trying to work up the courage to leave him. She had not found that courage. Not then. It had taken another 18 months, another dozen broken promises, another night spent locked in the bathroom while Grant raged on the other side of the door. But she was here now, divorced, free. So why did she feel so empty? Diana seemed to read her thoughts. "Hey," she said gently, "you are allowed to grieve, you know. Even when the thing you lost was hurting you, it still meant something." Avery nodded, not trusting her voice. They stopped at a red light. Diana glanced in the rearview mirror and snorted. "Speaking of your trash ex-husband," she said, "check out the parking lot, queen." Avery turned to look. Through the rear window, she could see Grant and Tiffany walking toward his BMW. Tiffany was wobbling dangerously on her 6-inch heels, grabbing Grant's arm for balance. As they watched, Tiffany stumbled on a crack in the sidewalk and nearly went down. Grant caught her with visible irritation, his handsome face twisted into something ugly and impatient. Diana smirked. 6-inch heels and a 6-month pregnancy. Bold strategy. Despite everything, Avery felt the corner of her mouth twitch. It was not a smile. Not yet. But it was something. The light turned green and Diana pulled forward, merging onto the highway toward her apartment in the Heights. Avery watched the courthouse disappear in the side mirror and tried to convince herself that this was the beginning of something new. It did not feel like a beginning. It felt like falling. "You know what we need," Diana announced, cranking up the air conditioning against the Houston humidity. "Tacos and margaritas, and possibly a bonfire where we burn everything that man ever gave you." "I do not have anything he gave me anymore," Avery said quietly. "He took it all back during the separation, said everything was technically his since he paid for it." Diana's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Of course he did. They drove in silence for a few more minutes before Diana spoke again, her voice carefully casual. "So he did not want to say anything while we were at the courthouse, but something weird happened while you were inside." Avery turned to look at her. "Weird how?" "A car pulled up next to mine in the parking lot. Nice car, like really nice. Tesla Model S, all blacked out. And this man gets out and just stands there for a minute, looking at the courthouse. Okay? And then he asked me if I know you. By name. He said, 'Excuse me, Are you here with Avery Mitchell? Avery frowned. Who was he? As no idea. Black guy, maybe early 40s. Built like he does construction or something. Nice suit, but not in a flashy way. He seemed, I do not know, serious. What did you tell him? I told him it was none of his business and that if he was one of Grant's friends, he could kindly go straight to hell. Diana, what? You think I was going to hand out your information to some random man in a parking lot? Please. Avery rubbed her temples. What did he say? Diana paused. He said he was not Grant's friend. He said he had been trying to reach you for 3 years, but that your husband always intercepted his messages. And then he said to tell you that the Riverside Community Center offer still stands, whatever that means. Avery felt her blood run cold. The Riverside Community Center. She had not thought about that project in 3 years. Had forced herself not to think about it, because thinking about it meant thinking about everything she had lost. Avery? Dana glanced over with concern. You look like you have seen a ghost. Pull over. What? Dana, pull over, now. Dana swerved into the parking lot of a CVS pharmacy, throwing the car into park. What is going on? Who is this guy? Avery's heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. 3 years ago, she said slowly, I got a job offer. A big one. Lead interior designer for a community center renovation project. It was the biggest opportunity of my career. It was everything I had ever wanted. Diana's eyes widened. And Grant told me I could not handle it. He said I was too fragile, too emotional. He said I would embarrass myself and ruin his reputation, so he made me turn it down. Avery stared out the windshield at nothing. Only I did not turn it down, she continued. He did. He sent emails from my account. He declined meetings on my behalf. By the time I found out what he had done, the project had already been assigned to someone else. Diana swore under her breath. That son of a... And the man who offered me that job, Avery said quietly, the man who came looking for me today. His name is Marcus Cole. Diana's jaw dropped. Marcus Cole, as in Cole Construction and Development? As in the guy who built half the affordable housing in the city? Avery nodded. Diana sat back in her seat, stunned. Avery, that man is worth like $200 million. He is not a billionaire or anything, but he is basically Houston royalty. Before Avery could respond, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment, then answered. Hello? Ms. Mitchell? The voice was deep and steady. This is Marcus Cole. We met briefly 3 years ago, though I doubt you remember. I was at the courthouse today, hoping to speak with you, but I did not want to intrude on what was clearly a difficult moment. Avery's throat tightened. I remember you, Mr. Cole. A pause. I hoped you would. I also hoped you might be interested in hearing what I have to say. I have a job offer, if you are still in the design field. Avery looked at Diana, who was making frantic go-on gestures with her hands. I am listening, Marcus Cole did not waste words. 3 years ago, I watched your ex-husband drag you out of my office in the middle of a presentation. I watched him tell my team that you were overwhelmed and unstable, and I watched you walk out with your head down, like you believed every word he said. Avery closed her eyes against the memory. I did not believe him, Marcus continued. I saw your portfolio. I saw your designs for the Riverside project. You had more talent in that one presentation than most designers show in their entire careers. And I spent 3 years trying to reach you, only to have every email returned, every call blocked. Grant, Avery said quietly, he controlled my accounts. I figured that out eventually, which is why I came to the courthouse today. Because I have a new project, Ms. Mitchell, $40 million, affordable housing for families in 3rd Ward. And I need a lead designer who understands what it means to build something that gives people dignity. Avery's breath caught. Mr. Cole, I do not even have a job right now. I have been out of the field for years. I do not know if I am not offering you the position outright, Marcus interrupted. I am offering you an interview. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. My office is in the Heights, on Washington Avenue. Come prepared to show me what you can do. Avery felt tears prickling at her eyes, not sad tears, something else entirely. Why, she asked quietly, why would you go to all this trouble for someone you met once 3 years ago? Marcus Cole was silent for a moment. Because I grew up in 3rd Ward, he said finally. I know what it is like to live in a place that makes you feel invisible. And 3 years ago, you showed me designs that could change that. Designs that had soul. I do not forget talent, Ms. Mitchell, and I do not forget cruelty when I see it. The line went silent. Monday, Marcus said, 9 o'clock, do not be late. He hung up. Diana grabbed Avery's arm. Well, what did he say? Avery stared at her phone, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. He offered me an interview, she said slowly, for the lead designer position on a $40 million project. Diana screamed so loud that a woman walking into the CVS dropped her purse. But Avery was not celebrating. Not yet, because somewhere in the back of her mind, a familiar voice whispered that this was too good to be true, that something would go wrong, that she would fail, just like Grant always said she would. She pushed the voice down and started the car. Let us go home, she said. I have a lot of work to do before Monday. Diana's apartment was a cramped two-bedroom unit on the second floor of a building that had seen better days. The carpet was worn, the walls needed painting, and there was a persistent water stain on the ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. But for the past 3 weeks, it had been the safest place Avery had ever known. She had shown up on Diana's doorstep at 2 in the morning with nothing but her purse and the clothes on her back. Grant had been particularly bad that night, not physically violent. He was too smart for that. But his words had been weapons, and he had wielded them with surgical precision. Diana had opened the door in her bathrobe, taken one look at Avery's face, and pulled her inside without a single question. The couch had become Avery's bed. The bathroom had become her refuge. And slowly, day by day, she had started to remember who she was before Grant Mercer convinced her she was nothing. Now, sitting at Diana's cramped kitchen table while Lily did homework and Diana heated up leftover pasta, Avery allowed herself to feel something that had been foreign for years. Hope. Mama, Lily said without looking up from her math worksheet. And Avery looks happy. Diana smiled. She does not she? Avery felt her cheeks warm. I just got some good news, that is all. Lily finally looked up. She was 7 years old with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Diana's ex-husband had left when Lily was 2, chasing some dream job in California that never materialized. He sent birthday cards sometimes when he remembered. Is it about a boy? Lily asked seriously. Avery laughed, surprised by the sound. No, sweetheart, it is about a job. Lily considered this. My teacher says jobs are important. She says when I grow up, I can be anything I want. That is right, Avery said. You can be absolutely anything. Even a dinosaur? Diana snorted. We have had this conversation, Mija. Dinosaurs are extinct. Lily shrugged with the unshakable confidence of a 7-year-old. Maybe they will come back. After dinner, after Lily had been put to bed with her stuffed elephant and her nightlight shaped like a star, Avery sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and tried to rebuild her career in the space of a weekend. It was not going well. Her portfolio was 3 years out of date. Her professional network had withered to nothing under Grant's careful isolation. Her bank account showed $847.32, which would not even cover first month's rent on the cheapest apartment she could find. And behind all of that, lurking like a monster in the shadows, was the simple fact that she had not designed anything in 3 years. Grant had convinced her to quit her job, saying they did not need 2 incomes. Then he had convinced her that her freelance projects were too stressful for her fragile mental state. Then he had convinced her that she was not really that talented anyway, that her early success had been a fluke, that nobody in the industry took her seriously. And she had believed him. The worst part was, she had believed him because part of her thought he might be right. Diana appeared with 2 cups of tea and sat down across from her. How bad is it? Avery turned the laptop to show her the bank account balance. Diana winced. Okay, we have dealt with worse, have we? Diana reached across the table and closed the laptop. Listen to me. You are not the woman Grant convinced you that you were. You are smart. You are talented. You survived 7 years with a man who tried to erase you, and you are still here. That is not nothing. Avery felt tears threatening. I do not even know if I can still do this. Design, I mean. It has been so long. What if I walk into that interview on Monday and I just freeze? Diana leaned forward. Then you will unfreeze. You will take a breath and you will remember who you were before him. and you will show Marcus Cole why he spent 3 years trying to find you. She pulled out her phone. Also, I already texted Carmen about your situation. Carmen was Diana's older sister, a family law attorney who specialized in domestic abuse cases. Avery had met her once at Diana's birthday party and had been intimidated by her sharp eyes and sharper questions. Diana, you did not have to. Yes, I did. Carmen says what Grant did, the emails, the accounts, the sabotage. It might be legally actionable. But you need to start documenting everything. Every text he sends, every voicemail, every email. Create a folder. Date everything. Avery nodded slowly. In cases like this, Diana continued, documentation is survival. Carmen's words, not mine. She is going to call you tomorrow to talk through your options. Avery looked at her best friend and felt something crack open in her chest. Why are you doing all this for me? Diana looked at her like she had just asked the stupidest question in the world. Because you are my sister, Avery. Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. And because I watched you shrink for 7 years. I watched you apologize for existing. I watched you disappear into that marriage until I could barely recognize you. She reached across the table and took Avery's hands. I am done watching, she said fiercely. We are going to fight, not for revenge, for your life. Avery nodded, not trusting her voice. Now, Diana said, releasing her hands and standing up. We have 3 days until your interview. Let us get to work. They stayed up until 2 in the morning, updating Avery's portfolio with old projects she had saved on a backup drive, practicing interview questions, researching coal construction and the Third Ward Housing Initiative. By the time Avery finally collapsed on the couch, exhausted but more alive than she had felt in years, she had something she thought she had lost forever, a plan, and maybe, just maybe, a future. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clear blue sky that made Houston feel almost bearable in January. Avery stood in front of Diana's bathroom mirror, trying to convince herself that she looked professional and competent, and not at all like a woman who had spent the last 3 years having her confidence systematically dismantled. The blazer was new, purchased yesterday with money she could not really afford to spend. It was gray this time, not navy. A fresh start. You look amazing, Diana said from the doorway. I look terrified. Same thing sometimes. Avery smoothed down her hair for the 100th time. What if he changed his mind? What if he looked at my portfolio and decided I am not worth the risk? What if Grant already got to him somehow? Diana stepped into the bathroom and physically turned Avery away from the mirror. Stop, you are spiraling. I can see it happening in real time. Avery took a shaky breath. I know. I am sorry. Diana held up a hand. No apologies. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to walk into that interview and you are going to show Marcus Cole what you are capable of. Not what Grant said you are capable of. Not what that voice in your head says you are capable of. What you know deep down that you can do. She pressed something into Avery's hand. A small stone, smooth and cool. Lily found it at the park last week, Diana said. She wanted you to have it for good luck. She says it is magic. Avery looked down at the ordinary gray pebble and felt tears threatening again. Tell her thank you. Tell her yourself when you get home with that job. Coal Construction headquarters was not what Avery expected. She had imagined a glass tower, all corporate polish and intimidating lobbies. Instead, she found herself standing in front of a renovated warehouse in the Heights, red brick and industrial windows, and a sign that looked like it had been hand-painted. The inside was even more surprising. Exposed beams and concrete floors, yes, but also warm lighting and plants everywhere, and a general sense that real work happened here. Not performance, not image management, actual work. Ms. Mitchell? Avery turned to find a black woman in her 60s approaching, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and an expression that suggested she had seen everything twice and was not impressed by any of it. I am Betty, Mr. Cole's assistant. You are early. I hope that is okay. Betty looked her up and down with shrewd eyes. It is fine, Mr. Cole hates late, but he hates overeager more. You hit the sweet spot. She gestured for Avery to follow. The office was on the second floor, a corner room with windows overlooking Washington Avenue. Marcus Cole stood when she entered, and Avery was struck again by how different he was from what she expected. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from physical labor, not gym memberships. His hair was cropped short, gray at the temples, and his face carried the lines of someone who had spent decades working outside. He wore a suit, but it sat on him like it was not his natural habitat. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Cole. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Before we begin, I want to be clear about something. I did not invite you here because I feel sorry for you. I am not in the business of charity hires. Avery felt her spine stiffen. I am not looking for charity. Good. Because what I need is someone who can lead a 2-year project with multiple stakeholders, community input sessions, and a board of directors who will question every decision. Someone who can handle pressure without cracking. He leaned forward, eyes intense. Can you do that, Ms. Mitchell? Avery thought about the last 7 years, the constant criticism, the isolation, the nights spent wondering if she was actually losing her mind or if someone was systematically trying to make her believe she was. She had survived that. Surely she could survive a construction project. Yes, she said, I can. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Tell me about the Riverside designs, the ones you presented 3 years ago. Avery hesitated. I do not have those files anymore. My ex-husband, I have them. Avery blinked. You kept them? Marcus reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder, sliding it across to her. I keep everything that impresses me. It is a short folder. Avery opened it with trembling hands. Her designs, her work, things she had thought were gone forever, deleted or destroyed like everything else Grant had touched. This project is not about luxury, Marcus continued. It is about dignity. I grew up in Third Ward. I know what it is like to live in housing that tells you every single day that you do not matter. I built this company to change that. He stood and walked to the window. I need someone who understands that, not someone who will give me pretty pictures for a brochure. Someone who will fight for every detail, every decision, every inch of space that could make a family feel like they belong somewhere. Avery looked at her old designs, at the notes she had made in the margins about natural light and community spaces and play areas where children could feel safe. She remembered why she had become a designer in the first place. Mr. Cole, she said quietly, I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mother after my father left. We moved 4 times in 5 years, always to cheaper places, always to neighborhoods where nobody looked at us twice. I know what it feels like to be invisible. She met his eyes. I also know what it feels like to walk into a space that tells you that you matter, that someone thought about you when they designed it. That is what I want to create. Marcus was silent for a long moment. You start Wednesday, he said finally. 3-month probationary period. Prove yourself, and the lead position is yours. Avery felt the world tilt. Just like that? Marcus almost smiled. I have been waiting 3 years for this interview, Ms. Mitchell. I already know what you can do. The question was whether you still knew it. He extended his hand. Welcome to Cole Construction. Avery shook it, hardly daring to believe this was real. Thank you, Mr. Cole. I will not let you down. See that you do not. She was halfway to the door when he spoke again. Ms. Mitchell, one more thing. She turned. I received an email this morning from your ex-husband. Avery felt her blood freeze. He wanted to warn me about you, said you were emotionally unstable and prone to unprofessional conduct. He offered to provide documentation. The room seemed to shrink around her. I deleted it without responding, Marcus said evenly. I do not take career advice from men who drag their wives out of meetings. But you should know that he is paying attention. Avery nodded, not trusting her voice. Watch your back, Ms. Mitchell. Men like that do not stop just because you got away. She walked out of Cole Construction, feeling like she was floating 3 feet off the ground. She had a job, a real job doing work that mattered, for someone who believed in her. For the first time in 7 years, she felt like herself again. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car, a text from an unknown number. Did you really think you could start over without me knowing? I told you, Avery, you are nothing without me, and now everyone else knows it too. Grant. The floating feeling vanished. The fear came rushing back like a tide she could not outrun. But underneath the fear, something else stirred, something that felt almost like anger. She deleted the text without responding and drove back to Diana's apartment. She had work to do. The first 3 weeks at Cole Construction were the happiest Avery had experienced in years. She threw herself into the Third Ward project with an intensity that surprised even herself. She spent hours in community meetings, listening to residents talk about what they needed, what they dreamed of, what they had given up hoping for. She sketched designs late into the night, filling notebook after notebook with ideas. And slowly, carefully, she began to trust her own instincts again. The team was good. Solid, experienced professionals who treated her with respect and asked for her opinions and never once made her feel like she did not belong. Marcus checked in regularly, not to micromanage, but to offer support and resources. It felt almost too good to be true, which of course it was. Grant always found a way. He always did. Even from 2,000 miles away, he was watching, waiting, planning. The text came on a Thursday afternoon while Avery was presenting preliminary concepts to the Community Advisory Board. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she ignored it, focused on the room full of people who were actually listening to her ideas. The presentation went well, better than well. The board members asked thoughtful questions, offered suggestions, and by the end of the meeting, Avery had their unanimous support to move forward. She walked out of the community center feeling invincible for exactly 47 seconds. Then she checked her phone. One new message from an unknown number. An attachment. She opened it without thinking. It was a screenshot of an email. An email from Grant to Marcus Cole sent that very morning. Mr. Cole, I feel obligated to warn you about Avery Mitchell. She has a documented history of emotional instability and was terminated from her last position due to unprofessional conduct. I have attached records from her previous employer as well as statements from colleagues who witnessed her erratic behavior. As her former husband, I only want to prevent her from embarrassing herself and your company again. Please feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions. Avery stopped walking. The Houston sun beat down on her, but she felt cold. Ice cold, her vision tunneled. The sounds of traffic, children playing, birds singing, all of it disappeared into a high-pitched ringing that filled her skull. Grant had contacted her previous employer. He had collected statements. He had built a case against her, just like he had done during the divorce, and he had delivered it straight to Marcus Cole. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Grant, told you. 2 words, just 2 words. And they contained 7 years of threats, 7 years of control, 7 years of making her believe she was nothing without him. Avery's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped her phone. She fumbled for Diana's contact, but before she could call, another message appeared on her screen. This one was from Betty. Mr. Cole needs to see you in his office, immediately. The walk back to Cole Construction felt like walking to her own execution. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a countdown to the moment when Marcus would look at her with disappointment and tell her that the job offer had been a mistake, that Grant was right, that she was too damaged, too broken, too unstable to be trusted with anything important. She could already hear his voice in her head, the same words Grant had whispered to her 1,000 times. You are nothing, you will always be nothing. Without me, you would be living on the street. By the time she reached his office, she could barely breathe. Marcus was standing by the window, his back to her. He did not turn around when she entered. Close the door, he said. She did. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Marcus spoke. I received some interesting correspondence this morning. Avery felt tears threatening. She forced them back. Mr. Cole, I can't explain. Can you? He turned to face her, and his expression was not what she expected. Not anger, not disappointment, concern. Tell me what really happened at your last job, he said quietly, and tell me the truth. Avery took a shaky breath. I was terminated 2 years ago, she said. The official reason was restructuring, budget cuts, but the real reason, she hesitated. Go on. The real reason was my husband, my ex-husband. He sent emails to my employer claiming I was mentally unstable. He convinced them I was a liability. By the time I found out what he had done, it was too late. Marcus nodded slowly. And the documentation he sent me? Falsified, forged. He had access to all my accounts, all my communications. He could make anything look like it came from me. Marcus walked to his desk and picked up a thick folder. This is what he sent me, he said. Emails, performance reviews, statements from supposed colleagues. Avery felt her heart sink. But here is the thing, Ms. Mitchell. I am a careful man. I did not get where I am by taking things at face value. He opened the folder. So I made some calls. I talked to your former supervisor directly. She told me a very different story than what is in these documents. She said you were one of the best designers she had ever worked with. She also said that your termination came after a series of anonymous complaints that she always suspected were fabricated. Avery stared at him. She suspected? She could not prove anything, Marcus said, but she remembered thinking it was strange that someone as talented and professional as you would suddenly become a problem employee overnight. He closed the folder. Your ex-husband made a mistake, Ms. Mitchell. He assumed I would take his word over yours without doing my homework. He assumed wrong. Avery felt a sob building in her chest. So I still have a job? You still have a job, Marcus confirmed, but this is not over. He is going to keep trying. You need to be prepared for that. Avery nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. Do you have a lawyer? My friend's sister. She specializes in domestic abuse cases. Good. Use her. Marcus sat down behind his desk. I meant what I said before, Ms. Mitchell. I do not forget cruelty when I see it. What your ex-husband is doing, it is not just personal. It is systematic. He is trying to destroy your ability to support yourself. He leaned forward. But I have seen what you can do, and I am not going to let some vindictive man's lies take that away from you, or from this project. Avery felt something shift inside her. Some piece of herself that had been lost for years, clicking back into place for the first time since the divorce. Someone in a position of power had believed her, had looked at the evidence, had done their own research, and had chosen her truth over Grant's lies. It should not have felt revolutionary, but it did. Thank you, Mr. Cole. Do not thank me. Just do the work. The rest will take care of itself. She left his office feeling shaky but strangely hopeful. Grant had tried to destroy her, again, and this time it had not worked. But as she walked to her car, her phone buzzed with one more text. Grant again. That was just a warning shot. The real ammunition is coming. Avery deleted the message, but she could not delete the fear that came with it, because she knew Grant, and Grant never bluffed. The call from Janet Reeves came on a Sunday morning, 3 days after Grant's failed attempt to get her fired. Avery was at Diana's kitchen table, reviewing floor plans for the Third Ward project, while Lily watched cartoons in the next room. Diana was making pancakes and loudly critiquing the choices being made by contestants on a home renovation show. The phone rang with an unknown number. Avery almost did not answer. After Grant's texts, unknown numbers had become a source of dread, another weapon in his arsenal. But something made her pick up. Ms. Mitchell? The voice was female, older, hesitant. My name is Janet Reeves. I was your ex-husband's executive assistant for 6 years, until he fired me last month. Avery set down her pencil. I am sorry, do I know you? No, but I know you. Or rather, I know what he did to you, because he had me help him do it. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. Even Diana stopped talking, turning to look at Avery with raised eyebrows. What do you mean? Avery asked carefully. Janet's voice was shaking. The emails he sent to your employer, the ones that got you fired, I typed them. He dictated every word and made me send them from a dummy account so they could not be traced back to him. Avery felt her heart stop. I did not want to, Janet continued, the words tumbling out now. I told him it was wrong, that he was destroying your career for no reason. But he said if I did not do it, he would fire me. And I have 2 grandchildren, Miss Mitchell. I needed that job. Avery closed her eyes. Why are you telling me this now? Because last month he fired me anyway, said I was getting too old, too slow. 23 years of loyalty, and he threw me out like garbage. Janet's voice hardened. And because I have been carrying this guilt for 3 years, and I cannot do it anymore. Not after I heard what he did to you at Cole Construction. He called me last week, asking me to provide another statement against you. I told him no. That is when I decided to reach out. Avery's mind was racing. Janet, do you have any proof of what you are saying, documentation? I have everything, Janet said. Every email I sent on his behalf, every document I forged, every voicemail where he gave me instructions. I kept copies of everything because I knew someday he would turn on me too. And I wanted protection. Avery looked at Diana, who was now standing frozen with a spatula in her hand and her mouth hanging open. Can we meet? Avery asked. Yes, I think we should. They met that afternoon at a Denny's off the Gulf Freeway. Not glamorous, but private. Janet Reeves was 55, white, with tired eyes and sensible shoes. She looked like someone who had spent her whole life being dependable and invisible, and Avery recognized something of herself in that. Two women, different ages, different backgrounds, different stories. But both had been used by the same man. Both had been thrown away when they were no longer useful. Janet slid a thick folder across the table. This is everything, she said. 6 years of records, everything he asked me to do, everything he said, everything he threatened. Avery opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page was an email she had never seen before, sent from Grant to a contact at her old firm, 3 days before she was terminated. She is becoming a liability. We need to move quickly before she realizes what is happening. Avery felt sick. He planned this, she whispered, months in advance. Janet nodded, stunned. He plans everything. It is how he operates. Nothing is spontaneous. Nothing is emotional. It is all calculated. She reached across the table and touched Avery's hand. I am so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have found a way to warn you. Avery shook her head. You were scared. I understand scared. The waitress came by to refill their coffee. She glanced at the papers spread across the table and raised an eyebrow. Divorce stuff? Janet managed a weak smile. Something like that. The waitress nodded sagely. Honey, I have been divorced 3 times. Take him for everything. That is my advice. It's fun. She walked away, and despite everything, Avery and Janet shared a tired laugh. So what do I do with all this? Avery asked. Take it to your lawyer, Janet said. Make copies, store them somewhere safe. And be careful, Ms. Mitchell. Grant is not the kind of man who gives up. If he finds out I talked to you. She did not finish the sentence. Avery understood. Thank you, she said. You did not have to do this. Janet shook her head. Yes, I did. I spent 6 years watching him hurt people. Employees, clients, partners. But you were different. He was obsessed with controlling you. And when you finally left, when you finally got away, it was like something broke inside him. She leaned forward. Be careful, Ms. Mitchell. He is more dangerous than you know. Avery left the Denny's with the folder clutched against her chest like a shield. She called Diana from the parking lot. I have it, she said. Everything we need. Diana's voice was fierce. Then let us take him down. Avery felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Not fear, not hope. Anger. Clean, cold, righteous anger. The kind that burned away doubt and left only clarity. She had spent 7 years letting Grant control her. 7 years shrinking, apologizing, disappearing. No more. Grant had made one fatal mistake. He had thrown away the one person who knew all his secrets. And now that person had given those secrets to Avery. The hunter was about to become the hunted. For 2 weeks, everything went right. Carmen reviewed Janet's documents and filed a motion to reopen the divorce settlement based on evidence of fraud. The judge granted a hearing. Janet agreed to testify. So did 3 other former employees that Carmen tracked down, all with similar stories of Grant's manipulation and threats. At work, Avery's designs for the Third Ward project were approved unanimously. Marcus gave her a corner office and a raise. The Community Advisory Board sent a letter of appreciation, and for the first time since the divorce, Avery started to believe she might actually win. She should have known that Grant was simply waiting for her to feel safe before he destroyed her again. She should have known better. The video appeared online on a Tuesday morning. Avery was at her desk reviewing material samples for the community center lobby when her phone exploded with notifications. Diana, Carmen, Janet, numbers she did not recognize, all with the same message. Have you seen this? She opened the link with a cold dread building in her stomach. It was her. From years ago, a video Grant had recorded without her knowledge, during one of her worst moments. She was sitting on the edge of their bed, sobbing uncontrollably, rocking back and forth, saying things she did not even remember saying. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot be who he wants me to be. I am falling apart. I am losing my mind. She remembered that night now. Grant had just told her that her father's funeral was not important enough to miss his business dinner. She had finally broken, and he had filmed it. He had filmed it and saved it for 7 years, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. The video had been posted to every social media platform with a single caption. This is the woman Cole Construction wants to lead a $40 million project. Emotional mess. Within an hour, it had 50,000 views. Within 2 hours, the comments section had become a war zone. Strangers calling her crazy, unstable, unfit. Words she had heard 1,000 times from Grant's mouth, now echoing from 1,000 anonymous faces. Avery sat at her desk, frozen, unable to breathe. The office phone was ringing. Her cell phone was ringing. People were stopping outside her door, whispering, pointing. She thought about running, about hiding, about disappearing the way Grant had always said she would. But then she thought about Diana, about Janet, about Carmen and Marcus, and everyone who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. And she thought about every woman who had ever been filmed at her worst moment by a man who claimed to love her. She picked up her cell phone and called Diana. I saw it, Diana said immediately. Are you okay? No, Avery admitted, but I am not going to fall apart. That is my girl. What do you need? I need Carmen, and I need a plan. Carmen called her back within the hour. This is actually good news, Carmen said. Good news? Avery nearly laughed. How is this good news? Because he just made a massive mistake. That video was stored in a private cloud account. Your account. He accessed it illegally. That is a federal crime, Avery. Unauthorized access to electronic communications. Avery felt a spark of hope. So we can use this against him? We can do more than that. We can get him arrested. But what about my reputation? What about the project? Carmen's voice was calm. In the court of public opinion, the first credible narrative wins. Grant put out a video that made you look unstable. We are going to put out the truth, that a controlling ex-husband illegally accessed your accounts and weaponized your most vulnerable moments. We control the story now. Avery took a shaky breath. How do we do that? Diana has a contact at the Houston Chronicle, Carmen said. A reporter named Rachel Dunn who covers domestic abuse cases. She wants to interview you. Not about the video, about the pattern. That afternoon, Avery sat in a coffee shop and told Rachel Dunn everything. The 7 years of control, the isolation from friends and family, the systematic destruction of her career, the harassment that had continued after the divorce. Rachel listened without interrupting, taking notes, asking follow-up questions that were sharp but never cruel. This is bigger than one man, Rachel said finally. This is about how abusers operate, how they weaponize systems against their victims, how they make the whole world complicit in the abuse. She looked at Avery with something like respect. Are you willing to go on record with all of this? Avery thought about the video, about the thousands of people who had watched her at her worst moment and laughed. Then she thought about all the women who had been in her shoes, who were still in her shoes. Women whose worst moments were being saved on hard drives and cloud accounts right now. Weapons waiting to be deployed. Yes, she said, I am willing. Not just for me, for every woman who has ever been afraid to leave because she knew he would find a way to use her pain against her. The story ran the next morning. The headline read, Houston Woman's Nightmare, How Her Ex-Husband Systematically Destroyed Her Career. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By evening, Marcus Cole had called a press conference to announce that Cole Construction stood behind Avery Mitchell and that anyone who had concerns about her qualifications could review the unanimous endorsement from the Community Advisory Board. We do not abandon good people because bad people attack them, Marcus said, looking directly into the camera. That is not how we do business. That is not how Texas works. And by midnight, the video that Grant had posted was being reframed across social media, not as evidence of Avery's instability, but as evidence of his cruelty. But Avery knew it was not over. Grant had not responded, had not retaliated. That silence was more frightening than any threat he could have made, because it meant he was planning something worse. The first catastrophe came 3 days later. Avery returned to Diana's apartment after a late night at the office to find the front door slightly open. Just half an inch, just enough to notice, just enough to make her blood turn to ice. She froze on the landing, her heart hammering. Diana and Lily were at Carmen's house for a sleepover. The apartment should have been empty. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, then slowly pushed the door open. Nothing looked disturbed. The furniture was in place. Lily's toys were scattered across the living room floor, just like always. But Avery's laptop was open on the kitchen table. She had closed it before leaving. She was sure of it. She walked slowly toward the table, still on the line with the emergency dispatcher, and saw what was on the screen. A single document, open and waiting. You think you won? This is just beginning. The cursor was still blinking, as if he had just finished typing, as if he might still be in the apartment, watching her read his message. She called the police. She called Diana. She called Carmen. The officers who arrived found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing missing, just the message. Grant had been in the apartment, or someone working for him, and they had wanted her to know. They had wanted her to feel unsafe, to feel watched, to feel hunted in the only place she had left to hide. The second catastrophe came the next morning. Janet Reeves called, sobbing. Someone broke into my house last night. They took everything, Avery. All the backup files, all the records, everything I had on Grant. It is gone. Avery's blood ran cold. Are you okay? Were you hurt? I am fine, Janet said. I was not home, but my neighbors said they saw a car leaving around midnight. A silver car, like Grant's. Avery closed her eyes. I'm so sorry, Janet. It is not your fault. But Avery, without those files, we have nothing. The originals were all I had. 23 years of documentation, 6 years of evidence, all of it gone in one night. Grant had not just stolen files, he had stolen their future. The third catastrophe came that afternoon. Carmen called with news that felt like a physical blow. The judge denied our motion, she said, her voice carefully controlled. Grant's lawyer argued that the evidence was obtained through questionable channels and could not be verified without the original documents. Which are now gone, Avery said flatly. Which are now gone, Carmen confirmed. Without them, we are back to square one. Oh. Avery sat in her car in the parking lot of Cole Construction, staring at nothing. Grant had systematically dismantled every weapon they had. He had broken into her home. He had stolen Janet's files. He had convinced a judge that the evidence against him was unreliable. He was winning, and she was running out of options. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grant. I told you, Avery, you cannot win against me. Come home, and maybe I will make this easy on you. She stared at the message for a long time. Come home. As if that apartment had ever been a home, as if she had ever been anything more than a prisoner there. Then she deleted it and walked back into her office. She was not going to give up. Not now, not ever. But she had no idea what to do next. That night, Avery got a call from her mother. They had not spoken in months. Grant had spent years convincing Avery that her family was toxic, that they did not really love her, that she was better off without them. Her mother had tried to stay in touch anyway. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, voicemails that Avery never returned because Grant monitored her phone. Now, hearing her mother's voice, Avery felt tears streaming down her face. Mom? Very, her mother said, and her voice was shaking. Grant is here. He showed up at my door in Beaumont. He is telling me you have had a breakdown, that you are dangerous, that you need help. He wants me to sign something. He says it is to protect you, but I do not. Mom, do not sign anything. I am coming. Avery drove 2 hours through the Texas darkness, breaking every speed limit, her mind racing. Grant had gone to her mother, had driven 3 hours to Beaumont to manipulate a 63-year-old woman who had never done anything except try to love her daughter. This was how far he would go. This was the depth of his obsession. He would poison every relationship, corrupt every connection, until Avery had nothing and no one left. By the time Avery arrived, Grant was gone, but her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a document in trembling hands. An involuntary commitment petition. Grant had been trying to get Avery's own mother to have her committed to a psychiatric facility. "He said you were a danger to yourself," her mother whispered. "He cried, Avery. He said he was so worried about you. He was so convincing. I almost signed it." Avery sank into a chair across from her mother. This is his endgame, she realized. If he could not destroy her career, he would destroy her freedom. Lock her away somewhere she could not fight back. A psychiatric hold, no phone calls, no lawyers, no witnesses. Just Avery, alone, drugged, while Grant told the world she had finally snapped. "Mom," she said carefully, "I need you to listen to me. Everything Grant told you is a lie. I am not dangerous. I am not unstable. I am trying to rebuild my life, and he cannot stand it." Her mother looked at her with tears in her eyes. "I believe you," she said. "I should have believed you years ago. When you stopped calling, when you stopped coming home for holidays, I knew something was wrong, but I did not know how to help." Avery reached across the table and took her mother's hands. "You can help now," she said, "by trusting me and by testifying about what Grant tried to do tonight." Her mother nodded slowly. "Whatever you need." "I lost you for 7 years," her mother said quietly. "I am not losing you again." Avery drove back to Houston with the commitment petition in her purse, evidence of Grant's desperation. But she knew it was not enough. He would find another way. He always found another way. She needed something more, something he would never see coming. And somewhere in the darkness between Beaumont and Houston, an idea began to form. An idea so dangerous, so audacious, that it made her hands tremble on the steering wheel. Grant thought he knew everything about her, every weakness, every fear, every breaking point. He was about to learn he had missed something. The last person Avery expected to see standing in Diana's living room was Tiffany. Diana had called ahead, warning her that someone wanted to talk, that it was important, that she should probably sit down. But nothing could have prepared Avery for the sight of Grant's pregnant mistress, the woman he had left her for, sitting on Diana's couch with mascara streaking down her cheeks. Diana was standing guard near the door, arms crossed, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. "She says she needs to talk to you," Diana said flatly. "I told her I would break her kneecaps if she tried anything." "I deserve that," Tiffany said quietly. Avery stood frozen in the doorway. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" Tiffany looked up, and Avery saw something she had not expected to see. Fear. "He is not the man I thought he was," Tiffany said. "I know you probably think I am stupid. I thought I was different. I thought he loved me. I thought—" She broke off, wiping her eyes. "He has been controlling everything. My phone, my money, who I talked to. I did not realize what was happening until he started treating me the way I watched him treat you." Avery felt something crack inside her. Not anger, not even satisfaction. Recognition. "A woman in my prenatal class," Tiffany continued. "Her name is Dr. Sharon Wells. She is a psychologist. She told me something that changed everything. She said abusers do not change partners. They change tactics." Avery nodded slowly. "She said I needed to get out," Tiffany said, "that it would only get worse." And she was right. Last week he took my car keys, said I did not need to go anywhere without him. This week he changed the passwords on my bank accounts. And yesterday, she pulled up her sleeve. Bruises, fingerprint shaped, circled her wrist. Diana swore under her breath. Avery moved forward and sat down on the couch next to her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I found these." Tiffany reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. They were on his computer, in a hidden folder. He does not know I have them. It is everything, Avery. Every email he sent about you, every document he forged, every plan he made. He kept records of all of it because he is so arrogant, he thought he would never get caught. Avery took the drive with trembling hands. "He has been doing this for years," Tiffany said. "You were not the first. There were women before you. I found emails going back a decade. The same patterns, the same manipulation, the same destruction. Avery looked at the small piece of plastic in her hand. Such a tiny thing to hold so much power. Why give this to me? She asked quietly. You could use it yourself. To get out. Because I am 6 months pregnant with his child, Tiffany said. And I need him to go to prison, not just lose his money, not just lose his reputation. Prison, so he can never do this to anyone else, including my daughter. She looked at Avery with an expression that was almost desperate. Destroy him. For both of us. Avery looked at Tiffany, at this woman she had hated for so long, who turned out to be just another victim of the same man who had nearly destroyed her. She reached out and took Tiffany's hand. We will destroy him together. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Carmen reviewed the files on the USB drive and confirmed they were genuine. Everything was there. The forged emails, the stolen money, the systematic destruction of every woman Grant had ever claimed to love. More importantly, there was evidence of federal crimes, wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud, enough to interest not just the state courts, but the FBI. Diana contacted Rachel Dunn at the Houston Chronicle, who was already working on a follow-up story. And Carmen reached out to 3 other women from Grant's past, women whose contact information was buried in the files he had so arrogantly kept. They all came forward. By Friday morning, there were 6 women prepared to testify, 6 women with similar stories, 6 patterns of abuse, isolation, and destruction that painted a picture even the most skeptical judge could not ignore. Carmen filed a new motion with the court. This time, she did not just seek to reopen the divorce settlement. She sought a restraining order, asset seizure, and criminal referral to the FBI. Grant was served papers at his office, in front of his colleagues, on a Friday afternoon for maximum humiliation. Avery watched from across the street, Diana on one side and Tiffany on the other. It was petty. She knew it was petty, but after 7 years, she had earned a little pettiness. Grant looked up from the papers, scanning the street until he found her. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment, Avery felt the old fear surge through her. Then Diana squeezed her hand and Tiffany shifted closer, and Avery remembered she was not alone anymore. She lifted her chin and did not look away. Grant got in his car and drove off without a word. He is going to retaliate, Diana said. You know that, right? Avery nodded. I know. What are you going to do? Avery watched his car disappear around the corner. Whatever I have to. The press conference was Rachel Dunn's idea, not a quiet interview, not a carefully crafted statement released through lawyers. A public event with cameras and reporters and the whole city watching. 6 women standing together telling their stories. Avery was terrified, but she remembered what Marcus had told her once about choosing to step into the light instead of hiding in the shadows, about letting people see who you really are, even when it hurts. She stood at the podium, flanked by Diana and Tiffany and Janet and the 3 other women she had never met until a week ago. Women who had been isolated and gaslit and convinced they were crazy, just like her. Grant Mercer, Avery began, and her voice was steady in a way she had not expected. Spent 7 years to telling me I was nothing without him. He isolated me from my family. He sabotaged my career. He forged my signature. He drained my accounts. He tried to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. She paused, looking at the cameras. But he made one mistake. He underestimated the women he hurt. We found each other. And together we are unbreakable. The story went national that afternoon. By evening, Grant had been arrested on federal charges of wire fraud, identity theft, stalking, and conspiracy. His mugshot was on every news channel. His assets were frozen. His reputation was destroyed. And Avery was finally, truly free. 6 months later, he stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Riverside Community Center, the first building in the 3rd Ward affordable housing project she had designed. The sun was warm, the crowd was smiling, and beside her stood everyone who had made this moment possible. Diana, with Lily on her hip, both of them wearing hard hats that were way too big for them. Janet, looking younger than she had in years, free from the guilt that had weighed her down. Tiffany, holding her newborn daughter, a girl she had named Hope. Marcus, standing quietly to the side, letting her have her moment. And somewhere in the crowd, Avery's mother, who had driven 3 hours from Beaumont to watch her daughter cut a ribbon. You did it, Marcus said quietly. We did it, Avery corrected. None of this happened alone. He smiled. Fair enough? The crowd applauded as Avery cut the ribbon, and she felt tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears, not scared tears, happy tears. The kind she had not cried in years. After the ceremony, after the photographs and the handshakes and the interviews, Marcus found her standing alone, looking at the building she had created. I have something for you, he said. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter from the Cole Construction Board of Directors, formally offering her the position of lead design director for all future community development projects. It was everything she had ever wanted. Marcus watched her read it, his expression carefully neutral. You do not have to decide now. Take your time. Think about it. Avery looked up at him. I do not need to think about it. She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Yes, my answer is yes. Marcus nodded, and something that might have been relief flickered across his face. Good, I was hoping you would say that. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing. He looked almost nervous, which was strange on a man who had built an empire from nothing. I know this is probably too soon. I know you have been through more than anyone should have to go through. But when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would like to take you to dinner. Avery felt something warm bloom in her chest, not swept off her feet, not rescued by a billionaire, just a man who respected her, asking for a chance. Coffee, she said. Coffee? Dinner is too much pressure. Let us start with coffee, maybe next week. Marcus smiled, a real smile, not the controlled expression he wore in business meetings. Coffee next week, I can do that. Avery watched him walk away, then turned back to look at the building she had created. A place for families, a place for dignity, a place that said, you matter. She had built it, not because someone rescued her, not because a billionaire swept her away, but because she had chosen to keep fighting, even when everything seemed lost. That night, back at her own apartment, the first place she had lived alone in 7 years, Avery sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to Grant. She never wanted to think about him again. A letter to herself, to the woman she had been 7 years ago, who had walked into a marriage full of hope and love and slowly lost every piece of herself. You survived, she wrote, not because someone saved you, because you saved yourself. You found your people, you fought back, and you won. Do not ever forget what you are capable of. She folded the letter and put it in her bedside drawer, next to the small gray stone that Lily had given her for good luck. Then she went to sleep, and for the first time in 7 years, she did not dream about Grant. She dreamed about the future. 3 months later, Avery was reviewing plans for the next phase of the Third Ward project when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost did not answer. She had blocked so many numbers over the past year, but something made her pick up. Ms. Mitchell? A woman's voice. Unfamiliar. My name is Sandra Mercer. I am Grant's sister-in-law. I got your number from the news coverage. Avery felt ice creep down her spine. What do you want? A long pause. I wanted to thank you for what you did. My husband, Grant's brother, he has been protecting Grant for years, covering up his behavior, bailing him out of trouble. But after your press conference, after everything came out, I finally had the proof I needed. Proof of what? That Grant was not the only one. My husband, he learned from his big brother, and now I am finally getting out. Avery closed her eyes. I am glad I could help, she said, and I am sorry for what you went through. Do not be sorry. Sandra said, be proud. You started something. More women are coming forward every day, not just about Grant, about men like him everywhere. You showed us it was possible to fight back. After she hung up, Avery sat for a long time, thinking about all the women she would never meet, the ones who had seen her story and found the courage to tell their own. She had thought she was just trying to survive. She had not realized she was starting a movement. Her phone buzzed again. Diana, coffee tomorrow morning? Lily wants to show you her new dress. Avery smiled. I would not miss it. She looked out the window at the Houston skyline, at the city where she had lost herself and found herself again. She was not the woman Grant had tried to make her. She was not broken. She was not nothing. She was Avery Mitchell, lead design director of Cole Construction, survivor, fighter, builder of things that mattered. And she was just getting started. And that is Avery's story, not a rescue, not a fairy tale, a fight, her fight, won by her own hands with the help of women who refused to let her fall. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you used to be, I would love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what moment hit you the hardest? And if you know a woman who needs to hear this today, share it with her. Sometimes a story is the lifeline someone did not know they needed. Hit that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss another story. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself. You matter.